Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube as we do our best to both educate, enlighten, and entertain for the next little while. On tap today, this is your chance to steer the ship. Dr. Jim Loomis is here, and that means that it is a Friday free-for-all with the doctor's mailbag. So we do need your questions about food, about diet, about health, vitamins, minerals, whatever is on your mind. Just drop your questions in the comments, or you can tweet them to us at Chuck Carroll WLC or at PCRM using the hashtag Exam Room Podcast. Dr. Loomis, you ready for a little bit of everything today?
Always, Chuck. Glad to be here.
Good man. I love the man that just comes ready to play. I like that so much. And don't forget, this is also day 2 of the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine. Coming up right after we finish this show, Dr. Kevin Hall will be speaking about the differences between caloric intake in plant-based diets versus animal-based keto diets. And then at 2 o'clock, the Fiber Queen, Lee Crosby, our dietitian extraordinaire, she's going to be presenting keto diets, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's at 2 o'clock Eastern. But before we get to any of that, let's get you caught up with what is happening in the world. Here are your health headlines for Friday, August 7th, 2020. We begin with a new forecast from the University of Washington that is projecting the COVID-19 death toll in the U.S. to reach nearly 300,000 by December, representing an additional 140,000 lives lost from where we stand today. However, the same model predicts nearly half of those lives can be saved simply by wearing a mask. Researchers say if 95% of people in the country were to consistently wear them, 70,000 lives could be spared. To date, 160,000 people have died in the U.S., while the total number of cases stands at nearly 4.9 million. Over in the UK, a growing number of Brits say they're willing to give up meat and fish in order to combat climate change. And they're willing to do it within the next year. A sizable number of them, too, 4 out of every 10. The commitments can be found in a survey conducted by the site finder.com. Among other environmentally friendly changes, 22% say they'll be eating more locally grown food, while 18% say they plan to grow their own. And half of those surveyed also say they plan to cut down on the amount of trash they are producing. In other news, I scream, you scream, we all scream for vegan ice cream. Sales of the dairy-free cool treat are booming, according to Instacart. The grocery delivery service says sales have jumped 25% in the last year, while searches for the term plant-based ice cream have surged by an amazing 658%. Instacart didn't say exactly what was sparking interest, but did point out that tens of millions of Americans are lactose intolerant. And file this under a little less fun, but far more enlightening. It's a new study showing just how much influence parents can have over their children's lifelong eating habits. It is no secret that children are naturally attracted to salt and sugar. Really, aren't we all? But researchers at the University of Oregon say how much a parent chooses to indulge in those foods themselves can play a big role in whether the child is able to control their cravings. Dueling studies of roughly 200 parents and kids found the more a child is fed junk and fast food, the less likely they are to eat vegetables. And just how big of an impact can one meal make? Well, get this. Researchers also concluded, quote, even having a single fast food or processed meal makes it hard, if not impossible, for children to fall within the dietary guidelines for the entire day. Now, Dr. Loomis, I want to bring you in to talk about this because this is pretty staggering. I'm not really all that surprised that eating habits get passed down from parent to child, but what does surprise me is the fact that if you think you can offset lunch at McDonald's by eating a big salad with dinner, you've got another thing coming.
Yeah, exactly. And, the results aren't surprising, Chuck. And I think it really gets to one of the key problems people have when they're trying to adapt a healthier diet and develop new habits around food. And it's the simple fact that eating is a learned behavior. And in many ways, it's by evolutionary design. If you had to think about walking, for example, I have to contract my quad, flex my hip, bend my knee, you would have walked right past the ripe berries. You wouldn't have seen the leopard in the bushes, and you wouldn't have lasted very long. So our brains evolved a mechanism when we habituate a task whether it be walking or eating or even the modern world driving, very quickly our subconscious brain takes over. And that's to allow our conscious brain to keep looking for opportunities and threat, leopards and berries, or berries and leopards. Unfortunately, we still have these, or fortunately, we still have these kind of Stone Age wired brains in the fast lane of the modern world. And so people don't realize that their food preferences, the things they like to eat, the things they don't like to eat, their triggers to start eating, environmental triggers, emotional triggers, their triggers to stop eating, that's stuff we learned when we were kids, and mainly we learned it from our parents. And I think, when we beat ourselves up sometimes saying, if I just had more willpower, I could eat healthier. But willpower is not the issue. It's really the way our brains are designed to work. And I think a perfect example of that for an adult is you go to a restaurant, and if the environmental trigger you learn to eat white bread, which arguably is not very healthy, highly processed, is when the waiter puts that basket of bread on the table, you don't have to think about eating the bread. You have to think about not eating the bread. And if you don't think about not eating the bread, what happens to the bread? You eat it, right? There's nothing you can do about it. Because that's the way our brains work. And the disconnect comes when patients come in and they say, hey, doc, I'm trying to do this plant-based thing and I don't understand. I'm not losing weight, or my cholesterol's not better. And I ask them what they had for dinner last night. And they tell me about the healthy quinoa kale salad that they ordered, but what's not on the list? The 5 pieces of bread they had slathered with olive oil they had waiting for the food to get there. And we are surrounded by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these bad choices. The workplace is the worst. You go in, there's donuts in the lounge, or someone's birthday, someone brought in cupcakes, on and on and on. And so recognizing that, I think, opens the door to people really making meaningful change. As I mentioned earlier, another example of this is driving, right? And we can talk on the phone, listen to radio, still make your exit, because our subconscious brain is making these driving choices for us when you put on the brake, when you put on the blinker, for the most part. You move to London tomorrow, what do you got to do? Learn how to drive on the other side of the street. And it takes months, 3 months, 6 months. Every time you get in the car, what do you got to think about? What side of the road am I on? What side of the pedestrians coming through the crosswalk? How do I go to the roundabout? And then one day, you get in the car, and guess what? That's how you drive. So really, when people are trying to adapt a healthier diet, what we're really trying to teach them to do is drive on the other side of the road. And to the last point of that news story you shared, Chuck, once you learn how to drive on the right side of the road, you wouldn't drive on the wrong side of the road in moderation, right? Because you would only have a moderate number of head-on collisions and run over a moderate number of pedestrians. And that's exactly what happens when we eat a single fast food meal. Whether you're a child or an adult, you are running over the lining of our heart, the endothelial lining of our blood vessels, our prostate cells, our colon cells, our breast cells, our pancreas with diabetes, on and on and on. And we know that when you look at coronary artery disease, you start to see fatty streaks, which is the precursors to atherosclerosis, in the first decade of life because of the Western dietary patterns that most people follow.
It's just so wild to me, the impact that just that single one meal can have. It's just incredible. And then, obviously talking about how, a child's taste is adapted based off of what it is that the parent, is choosing to eat themselves and then feed the children. I mean, it's all connected, and it absolutely fascinates me. We could spend hours talking about that, but let's go ahead and open up the doctor's mailbag right now. We'll have ourselves a Friday nutrition free-for-all. So if you have a question for Dr. Loomis, go ahead and post that in the comments section, or again, you can tweet them to us using the hashtag #ExamRoomPodcast. Dr. Loomis, first question is actually a holdover from yesterday's show. I thought that it was really good, and I wanted to make sure that it got addressed. It's a question from Vanessa. She wants to know whether the keto diet and intermittent fasting are healthy.
So that's a book length question, but I'll try to be succinct. And if you really want to get the skinny, no pun intended, on intermittent fasting and keto diets, you should tune in to Lee later this afternoon, because she has an amazing talk that really lays out the pros and cons of a ketogenic diet quite well. So if you think about what a ketogenic diet is, our brains have to have sugar, glucose, to function. and our brains can't store sugar. So we have to rely on the glucose, stored in our livers primarily in the form of glycogen to maintain a steady state of glucose in our bloodstream. And when we enter a starvation state, when we've run out of food, and eventually we will deplete all of the muscle glycogen in our bodies. And so we can no longer, it makes it very difficult to sustain blood glucose levels in the bloodstream. And so our brains start to become starved for energy, and that's not a good thing. So we evolved a mechanism, is kind of the end game of starvation, really, to utilize what are called ketone bodies to keep us alive. It's a last-ditch effort to fuel our brains to keep us alive till we can find another meal before we starve to death. So the original ketogenic diet was famine, starvation. And it came about through calorie restriction, because we were starving. So the idea that we should be trying to create an artificial ketogenic state by dietary manipulation just doesn't make sense from an evolutionary standpoint at all. And the kind of the dietary patterns that are required to create ketosis are pretty extreme. Very low carb, high fat, high protein diets. And we know that over the long run, those dietary patterns associate with an increased risk for many chronic diseases, heart disease, many kinds of cancer, such as that. Now, intermittent fasting is a little bit different, and I think there probably are some health benefits potentially for intermittent fasting. At the tail end of intermittent fasting, some people will develop mild ketosis, but that's how we're designed to develop ketosis, is through starvation. And there's been a lot of research by a researcher out of UCLA named Walter Longo. He has a great book called The Longevity Diet, which goes into detail about some of his research. So, at first it may seem counterintuitive that if you're starving, that somehow your immune system would be ramped up and which might protect you against certain kinds of cancer and things like that. But if you really, again, think about it from an evolutionary standpoint and realize that fasting was really the end game of our lifespan, unless we found some more food. If the mere act of fasting would ramp up our immune system, so we could heal infections and heal wounds and fight infections to keep us alive long enough to find that next meal, then that would make perfect sense. And that's what some of the research suggests. There's also a lot of research around weight loss and insulin sensitivity and such as that. So intermittent fasting, I think, is something that does have some health benefit. There's a couple ways that people commonly do it. One is called a 16-8 strategy. So it's time restricted eating, where you take no calories in between, most people will say 8 p.m. to noon. You can drink water and black coffee and green tea, but nothing with sugar. And you don't restrict your calories, you just restrict the feeding window. So you take all those calories in between noon and say 8 p.m. Another strategy some people use is called a 5-2 strategy, where 2 days a week you do a 24-hour water fast. As far as I know, there's no research to suggest that one is more beneficial than the other. So ketosis, not so much. Intermittent fasting, I think there's some reasonable evidence-based health reasons to consider it for some people.
All right, next question. We know that two of the big benefits of a plant-based diet are that it can lower your blood pressure and lower your cholesterol. With that in mind, Amanda wants to know, is it possible for someone to have too low cholesterol or blood pressure on a plant-based diet?
So, it depends. And I say that, especially around blood pressure, it depends on if you're on medications or not. If you look at the normal range of blood pressure, some people come in and their blood pressure is 90/60, and that's normal. Some people come in, their blood pressure is 120/70, and that's normal. If your normal blood pressure is 120/70 and you suddenly were to drop it to 90/60, or if you've got high blood pressure and you overtreat it, then in fact you will have symptoms from that. You get lightheaded, dizzy when you stand up, feel like you're going to pass out, fatigue, draggy, things like that. And that's why it's so important when people do start to adapt to healthier lifestyle through diet and exercise, and they're on blood pressure medicine, that you let your doctor know what you're doing and you monitor your blood pressure very closely, because often I've seen people come off their blood pressure medicine literally in a matter of days, who have really gone on a low fat, high fiber, low salt, high potassium diet combined with exercise. So, you know, if you're not taking medications, and then unless there's some untoward illness that's you know, you're dehydrated, or you've got a blood infection which is making your blood pressure go artificially low, there's really no low in. There's no concern about having low blood pressure. I mean, in fact, my blood pressure used to run about 135 over 85, which would be considered high these days. And after I went plant-based to now it runs about 105 over 60, and you know, that's normal for me now. Now cholesterol, kind of the same story. There is some theoretic concern about very, very low cholesterols, which have been driven down through especially with medications, and I'm talking about total cholesterols in the 60-70 range, which I've seen on occasion. And there's some controversy that it may affect our mood and increase risk for suicide and things like that. That research is not great, but it is a theoretic concern. Now, dropping your cholesterol through, you know, ideally, what we want is to have your total cholesterol 150 or less, your HDL 70 or less, closer to 50 preferably. So you can certainly do that with a plant-based diet, and there's really no floor for that. But if you're on medications and you go on a plant-based diet and your cholesterol gets super, super low, it might be something you want to talk to your doctor about.
Next question comes from Jacqueline. She writes, I believe calcium slows the absorption of iron in people who have anemia. Is it the same, though, if the calcium comes from plants?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we take in iron from meat, what we're consuming is a form of iron called heme iron. So it's iron that's bound to hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is the protein in our red blood cells that carry oxygen. It's actually what makes our blood red. So basically, when we consume dead animals, we're also consuming dead animal blood, and that's where iron comes from, which is kind of disgusting if you think about it. So the problem is, yes, there are some things like calcium which can interfere with heme iron absorption. Heme iron, it turns out, is a very potent pro-oxidant and creates inflammation. And there's an association between getting too much iron and heart disease and cancer and diabetes and things like that. Now, there is iron in plants. Green leafy vegetables, legumes, molasses all have a lot of iron, but the iron is not bound to hemoglobin. It's bound to, so it's called non-heme iron. It is more difficult for our bodies to absorb. It doesn't seem to be affected by the calcium, but you do need to co-ingest a source of vitamin, a source of vitamin C to facilitate the absorption of the heme iron. And so the idea is you want to put a little lemon juice or lime juice in a salad dressing, or squeeze it over a salad, put a little, finish a soup or a stew with a little lemon or lime juice, you know, red bell peppers. Bell peppers have a tremendous amount of vitamin C, snacking on citrus fruit, putting citrus fruit in your salads, things like that. The other interesting thing is our body will absorb as much heme iron as we ingest. We end up storing any extra iron we need, and it stores in the liver, which can cause problems, a condition called hemochromatosis, which can cause inflammation in the liver. A non-heme iron, once our iron stores are replete, the body will stop absorbing it. So it's kind of more self-regulating, which I think is a much healthier way to get your iron.
All right. Question from BR comes to us at 12:04. Let's dial up your old Game Changers background, your athletics background. BR writes, hello, doctor. Please discuss appropriate daily grams of fat for athletes.
Well, athletes have no different requirements for fat than anybody else. I think that so if you look at the natural macronutrient ratios of a diverse whole food plant-based diet, it's about 75% unprocessed carbs, about 15% protein, about 10% fat. So I think maintaining a fat intake of no more than 15% of your total calories, so you can do the math backwards, there's not 9 calories per gram of fat, then I think you're fine. You know, the question we usually get is about protein, not fat. And what's interesting is, yes, athletes may need a little more protein, but athletes also need more calories. So if you double your calorie intake, you're doubling your protein intake. So calories and fat, and I mean fat and protein, that shouldn't be the concern. It's really about getting enough calories, especially if you're performing more intense endurance athletics or intense training regimens around strength training.
Denise here, getting kind of Shakespearean with the phrasing of her question. Beans, to soak or not to soak? Is there an impact on phytate levels, or does cooking alone take care of it? Would love to get an overview on that.
So this idea that phthalates are some type of anti-nutrients is fairly prevalent in the kind of paleo carnivore community, that we shouldn't be eating beans because of this phytic acid, these phthalates, which can impair the absorption of other vitamins and minerals. That's the concern. And in fact, beans do have phthalates, right? But when you cook beans, it deactivates the phthalates or lowers the level. And so it's not functionally a concern. I don't know of any evidence to suggest that soaking the beans changes the phthalate level. It's more cooking, the way I understand it. I think that the soak to not soak beans is more prevalent in the Instant Pot community, and I've cooked beans both ways. I think you can shorten the cooking time a little bit if you cook them, if you soak them. But if you're using an Instant Pot, the difference between soaked and unsoaked beans is not that much. Now, I have to say, if you've had beans stored for a long time, dried beans in the cabinet, they do tend to get harder, and soaking those may be of some benefit. But from a nutrition standpoint, I do not know of any evidence that soaking the beans versus not soaking the beans before cooking them, especially in an Instant Pot, makes any difference.
All right, 1211, question from Laura. Oh boy, let's get her some help. I'm finding it impossible to lose weight on starches. It seems like I can only lose weight eating tons of green vegetables. I'm in my late 50s. Does metabolism really slow down?
Well, it does slow down a little bit, but oftentimes when weight loss is a very complicated, and metabolism is a very complicated kind of balance between calories in, calories out. The problem is that's not exactly true, right? And so when we eat plant-based foods that are processed versus plant-based foods that are unprocessed, there's a huge difference. So when we take an apple and we eat an apple, the 100 calories in the apple, our bodies have to do work to break up the apple. The nutrients, or the pectin, the soluble fiber, absorbs water, slows the progression through our digestive tract. We slowly absorb those calories. Our insulin levels don't spike. All is good. We take the same apple and turn it into apple juice, and we drink it. That our sugar levels spike. Those calories become readily available, and so physiologically they're completely different. And the fiber doesn't make us feel full. On and on. So in general, when people reach a weight loss plateau, there's several things I typically want to look at. So one is really taking a close look at the nutrient density of their food. You really want to try to eat foods that have less than about 700 calories per pound. And so that's, unprocessed carbs, starchy whole food vegetables like potatoes and sweet potatoes and things like that. Fruit, vegetables, obviously, legumes, great sources of nutrient-dense food. On the other side of the graph, avocados. Sometimes people, there's two foods that people tend to overconsume even on a plant-based diet, which can create a weight loss plateau. So avocados are one. They have about 750 calories per pound. You really want to limit avocados, use it like a condiment. The other one are nuts and nut butters. I have a weakness for peanut butter, and I have to be very careful because I could sit there and eat tablespoons of peanut butter. Peanut butter has about 1,000 calories per pound, and nuts as well. And so you have to be very careful with those two things. So you really want to be careful with that. Sometimes I'll actually have patients use an app like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer and do a 48-hour food diary, and just be sure that they're hitting their fiber mark, which is going to make you feel full, and as a sign of nutrient density. You want to shoot between 50 and 100 grams of fiber a day. And then also limiting their fat intake. So again, as I just said, no more than 15%, preferably less than 10%. And the reason is for every gram of fat that you consume as opposed to carbohydrate or protein, you double the calories. And then the second side of the equation is the exercise side, just to be sure that you're staying physically active. That helps rev up your metabolism. Sometimes what happens is people start an exercise program and the amount of work they do, which predicts calories, was a lot when they started. But then as they get in better shape, that same amount of exercise doesn't raise your heart rate. So you're not burning the same kind of calories. So using your heart rate to kind of determine if you're burning enough calories is a rough rule of thumb. It's 220 minus your age. And you want to keep your heart rate between 60 and 80% of that number between 30 minutes and an hour every day is ideal. And then lastly is if there's still issues, is there are other things that can affect our metabolism, in particular thyroid function. Thyroid disease is relatively common in people, young and middle-aged women in particular. So being sure that you've had some recent blood work and be sure that your thyroid's okay is also important.
All right. COVID-related question comes to us from Linda at 1211. She wants to know, should I be taking zinc for COVID protection? Does that boost the immune system? So
there is a little bit of research around using zinc to prevent and to treat cold symptoms, the common cold. Coronavirus, other strains of the coronavirus are one of the causes of common cold. I do not know of any research to suggest that taking zinc supplements specifically protects you against coronavirus, the COVID-19. Like any micronutrient, it is important to maintain an adequate intake of zinc, and there are some plant-based foods that contain zinc. There's a great resource I like. It's not completely plant-based, but if you go and look at the lists of food, most of the high nutrient dense foods for zinc or calcium or potassium all are plant-based. It's called the world's healthiest food. And if you just Google world's healthiest food and then zinc, it will give you a list of foods that have lots of zinc in it. And so you can try to get plenty of zinc through dietary zinc through the foods that you eat.
Another COVID question. This one comes to us from Eddie, who wants to know any extra measures I should take post-operation with COVID-19. Just had surgery on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we should all be precautious, no matter what state we're in, if you will. Now, it's especially important if you have underlying chronic diseases like obesity or high blood pressure or cholesterol, heart disease, asthma, things like that. But just simply having surgery doesn't necessarily put you at increased risk for COVID. And so I think the same precautions that we all should is social distancing, wash your hands religiously, wear a mask, such as that.
Eddie, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me personally on Facebook. I've been through what it is that you just went through. So if you have any recovery questions, just let me know. I'd be happy to help you out as best as I can. Follow-up question to the peanut butter one. And I will tell you that I too am a sucker for peanut butter. I wrestle with that sometime when I'm making a smoothie and I've got all of these great fruits and vegetables in there. And I'm like, a little bit of peanut butter would taste pretty good. But then I'm like, no, let's keep this one low fat. So Edith is also a fan of peanut butter, but she wants to know, if we have to limit peanut butter consumption, can we eat boiled peanuts? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that's fine. Boiled peanuts, roasted peanuts, they still have a lot of fat though, right? And so that's why you have to be careful with the serving size. Because I know if I got a big thing of boiled peanuts or shelled peanuts, I'm at the baseball game, or especially the peanuts that have been shelled for me, I could easily eat handfuls. So that's why I sometimes will suggest that people do a 48-hour food diary. I like the 48 hours. So if you have peanuts one day, you cut back a little the next day. But really, really just being careful about your fat intake, because again, peanuts, no matter how they're prepared, roasted, boiled, still have a fairly high fat content. And so a serving size is probably no more than a quarter of a cup at most for the whole day.
Time for just a couple more. We were talking about fasting a little bit earlier. Pam's got a question. How do you feel about extended juice fasting?
Well, you do have to be careful that, depending on if you're talking about just using like carrot and celery juice, that's really almost the equivalent of fasting because that's a very low calorie diet. You're probably talking less than 500 calories a day. It may play a role in certain health conditions, but it needs to be medically supervised because you need to be sure that your electrolytes stay in line, that you're staying hydrated and such as that. So, any fast more than a couple of days really needs to be done especially when you're talking about longer fasts, a week or 2 weeks, really needs to be undertaken under the supervision of a medical professional.
All right, let's see here. I'm trying to find a really good question to take things home for us today. All right.
While you're thinking, I want to come back to what we talked about earlier because this is very important about the genetics, right?
Yeah.
I hear every day people say, I have type 2 diabetes because it runs in my family, and that's why I have it. But what we forget is, to the point of our whole early discussion, what else runs in our families? What do we inherit from our families? We inherit our plates of food, right? And what we inherit on our plates is much more important for our overall health than what we inherit in our genes in most situations. And it's something we don't think enough about. So your genes do not have to be your destiny. Your plates oftentimes create that destiny. And so choosing what's on your plate is going to be much more important than choosing your parents.
Oh, so true. I mean, I remember growing up, and I think a big part of what got me into the jackpot that I eventually got to at 420 pounds were those nightly trips through the drive-through or going to grandma's house after school, and she would have this jar of bacon grease on top of the stove. And it didn't matter, Dr. Loomis, what she was cooking. She always put a scoop of that grease in there. It could be grits. It could be, she loved to fry bologna in bacon grease. So, that just really set me on the path for that unhealthy future.
You must have grown up in the South somewhere because that sounds like my upbringing.
Southern Virginia, my friend. Southern Virginia.
So, you're exactly right. So where did I learn that I go to a Nats game? That's when I drink a beer and eat a hot dog, right? Or it's 4th of July. So let's barbecue some ribs and have some hamburgers. Or it's someone's birthday. Let's have cake and ice cream. The Little League team won. Let's take one out for pizza. I learned that from my family. And none of which are healthy choices, but that that becomes the normal way we think about what we do, because again, as I mentioned earlier, that's what we've learned. So anyway, I meant to say that earlier, but I think it was important enough to bring it back up. So
oh, absolutely. That's such a key point. Let's wrap up the doctor's mailbag. We're going to close it up with this final question from Chim at 1221. Wants to know, how do you cure GERD on a vegan diet?
Well, so GERD stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease. So it's acid reflux. So there's many causes of acid reflux. Sometimes it can be a mechanical problem where you've got a hiatal hernia or something like that. But in general, we know that you need to be careful about acidy foods. You want to oftentimes losing weight will help. Probably the most important thing I found is not eating within 3 hours of going to bed, because that's a gravity issue. When we eat, that stimulates acid. We lay down, that's just an open pipe. And especially when you've got some chronic reflux where you've got maybe a little irritation, which affects the sphincter where the esophagus meets the stomach. So the food kind of has an open pipe, which just makes it worse. Sometimes even elevating the head of your bed a little bit at night is helpful. But things like alcohol, anti-inflammatory medications like Advil, Aleve, being careful with the acidy foods. Some people don't tolerate spicy foods, but the high fiber, low fat diet in general really helps settle things down. It slows the gastric emptying, so there's not a lot of it soaks up a lot of the acid, things like that. So so if you go, Dr. Michael Greger at nutritionfacts.org has a few great videos on acid reflux. So if you go there and nutritionfacts.org and just search for the ones on reflux, he has a lot of great information, evidence-based, about some specific things about diet and reflux.
It's funny, man. That late night eating, that's a lesson that we just seem to learn in life over and over and over again. It's for whatever reason, when we get tired, it just seems like that's when the hunger hits. And right before you go to bed, you get that snack. And then even if you don't get heartburn, I know that when I indulge right before I go to bed, I wake up feeling sluggish.
Right. No, that's right. And yeah, so again, try not to eat within 3 hours of going to bed. I found is probably the most effective strategy to help with acid reflux as a starter.
All right. If we didn't get to your question today, as always, have no fear. Keep on posting it. We do save each and every one, and we will try to get you an answer on a future show. Another route that you could take, though, is to make an appointment one-on-one with Dr. Loomis or any one of the doctors or dietitians at the Barnard Medical Center. They would love to work with you on your diet, whether you're brand new to the vegan game or you've been whole food plant-based for years. They can always help to take your health to the next level. So what you want to do is pick up the phone and call 202-527-7500 or visit barnardmedical.org. It's not just Dr. Loomis. You see Dr. Vanita Rahman right there on the screen. She's been on the show many times. Dr. Jazz, she too is a regular here on the exam room. Dr. Jasmine Sardana, she can see you. Dietitians, Lee Crosby, the Fiber Queen, Susan Levin, Maggie Neola, all of them would love to work with you to become a healthier version of yourself. So here is the score. Right now, telemedicine appointments are available in the following states. Don't worry, you don't need to write this down. It's all on barnardmedical.org. But the following states is where this is available: Illinois, Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York, Maryland, Virginia, Missouri, Arizona, Colorado, Massachusetts, Kentucky, Florida, Georgia, and right here in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. Any one of those locations, you can call and make that appointment today, 202-527-7500, or visit barnardmedical.org. That, again, we did the math last week. That is more than a quarter of the country now, Dr. Loomis, where telemedicine is available at the Barnard Medical Center, which is just fantastic. And I really hope that people are taking advantage of that as these new states continue to come online.
They are, and it's really great professionally to be able to really help people, say, who want to get off their diabetes medicine or get off their blood pressure medicine, practice adapt a healthier lifestyle when they don't have those resources available in their local community, and being able to connect with them no matter where they're at across the country and provide the kind of counseling and support they need to make this hard change. As I said, change is not easy, and again, I think it's because of these learned behaviors that we have, and trying to unlearn them and learn new ones is difficult. And you really need that support, and that's what we're trying to provide.
That's it. So visit barnardmedical.org and make your appointment. And I know you guys are working on adding new states in the near future as well.
That's exactly right.
All right, Dr. Loomis, have yourself a fantastic weekend, my friend.
Thanks. Take care. Stay safe.
All right. Now, coming up on Monday's show, we're calling it Monday Motivation. That's exactly what it is. You've heard me talk about this on the show, and maybe you've even downloaded the interview on the Exam Room podcast. But now on Monday, we are going to play for you the full interview, the exclusive interview that I did for the podcast with Eric O'Gray about his 96-year-old mother-in-law who moved in with him and his wife, and within just a matter of weeks, was taken off all of her medication, got up, got mobile, now walking 2 to 3 miles a day. And this was at 96 years old. And just this past Monday, she turned 97. And so if you think to yourself, man, I'm too old to make this change, I'm so set in my ways, I could never do this. Well, you're looking at Josephine Stagnero right there, 97 years young, whole food, plant-based, taken off all of her medication, up and walking 2 to 3 miles every single day. How's that for motivation, right? The only obstacles we have are the ones that we have in our minds. So tune in for that full interview right here on Monday's show. That is at noon Eastern, right back here on Facebook and on YouTube. But until then, for today, we are fresh out of time. My thanks again to Dr. Jim Loomis for fielding so many questions, and to the crew behind the scenes that makes this magic happen. Our director is Donna Steele, and our producer is Laura Anderson. And for everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so very much for watching. And until Monday, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.